Let me share something with you. Something I've learned after more than 60 years of living, more than 30 years of sitting with people who have walked through half a lifetime and countless hours listening to them in their most vulnerable moments. You are not your emotions. You are the vast open sky, not the clouds drifting across it. I want you to pause for a moment and let that truth sink into your heart. Imagine the sky on a quiet autumn afternoon here in America. A soft breeze, white clouds moving gently overhead. Sometimes dark clouds gather. Sometimes the sky clears again. But if you notice, the sky itself doesn't change, remains wide, deep, and steady. Only the clouds shift. Our emotions work the same way. Some days you feel anxious for no obvious reason. Some mornings you wake up inside a sadness you can't explain. Some evenings, anger rises quickly over a single careless word, and sometimes you start believing, I am this sadness, I am this anger, I am this fear. But my friend, that isn't true. I once worked with a woman in her late 50s. She used to tell me I'm just a sad person. I'm always worried. I looked at her gently and said, no, you're not a sad person. You're simply experiencing clouds of sadness passing through your mind. She fell silent, and then her eyes filled with tears. For years, she had mistaken temporary emotions for her true identity. Have you ever felt that way? That when anger comes, you become the angry person, or when fear rises, you become that trembling version of yourself. Neuroscience tells us that emotions are nothing more than short bursts of electrical and chemical activity in the brain. They come and go. They shift with memories. Hormones, sleep, weather, even a single piece of music can change them. What matters is that you are the one who observes the emotion, not the emotion itself. When you learn to stand just one small step behind your feelings, just one step, everything begins to change. You start saying, this is sadness instead of I am sad. This is anger arising instead of I am anger. And like the sky watching clouds drift by, you begin to see that emotions never stay. They fade, they transform, they pass, always passing. You are something far bigger and far quieter than any emotion. You are the sky, not the clouds, not the storm, not the dark, heavy day. And when you remember that, a deeper kind of peace begins to open, a peace no wind can ever take away. Let me continue with something I've watched unfold again and again in the lives of people over 50, and in my own life as well. True freedom is not the ability to do whatever we want. That kind of freedom fades by the time we hit our 20s. Real freedom, the kind that brings peace, is the ability to choose our response with clarity instead of reacting out of habit. I want you to imagine this for a moment. You're sitting in your living room. Someone says something careless, something sharp, and suddenly you feel the old familiar urge rising, the urge to snap back, defend yourself, or shut down completely. Before you even realize it, the emotion has pulled you into its current. Most people live their whole lives that way. They don't choose, they react, like a leaf blown by every passing wind. But as we age, something shifts. Life begins to invite us, sometimes gently, sometimes by force, into a deeper kind of awareness. I once worked with a man in his early 70s. He told me, all my life I thought freedom meant saying whatever I wanted. Now I'm learning freedom is choosing when not to speak. There was wisdom in his smile when he said that, because conscious choosing is subtle. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It whispers in moments like these. Do I really need to argue back? Is this thought true, or is it just my old wound talking? Will this reaction bring peace or more pain? When you pause even for 3 seconds, you reclaim a little piece of your life. You create space between stimulus and response, and inside that space, that's where freedom lives. Neuroscience supports this too. When you pause to observe your impulse instead of acting on it, you activate the prefrontal cortex, the wise, steady part of the brain. That single pause can completely rewrite your emotional patterns over time. Let me ask you a question. How many moments in your life would have unfolded differently if you had paused just once before reacting? I think about that often, because conscious choosing is not glamorous. It doesn't look dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as choosing to breathe instead of blame, choosing silence instead of shouting, choosing to let a small irritation drift away instead of gripping it like a weapon. And when you practice this slowly, gently, imperfectly, you begin to feel a shift. Life becomes less like a battle you're fighting and more like a river you're learning to navigate. You realize you don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. You don't have to pick up every emotional burden offered to you. You don't have to let every passing mood control your day. That, my friend, is a quiet kind of liberation. The kind of freedom that grows with age. The kind of freedom we earn through wisdom, not willpower. The kind of freedom that turns ordinary moments into moments of deep inner peace. Let me share with you one of the quietest yet most destructive habits I've seen in my years of working with people over 50. Complaining. Not the loud, dramatic kind. No, the subtle kind. The kind that slips into our days unnoticed, like a slow poison. It starts small. The traffic is terrible today. My knees hurt again. The weather is too hot, too cold, too something. People don't act the way they used to. And little by little, we don't even hear ourselves anymore. But the mind hears it. The body hears it. The heart hears it. I want you to imagine this. Every complaint is like adding one more drop of dark ink into a glass of clear water. One drop doesn't seem like much, but after 100 drops, the whole glass changes color. I once had a client in her early 60s, bright, intelligent, deeply kind. Yet she carried a constant heaviness. She would say, "Nothing is really wrong, but I just feel drained all the time." As we talked, I noticed she didn't realize how often she complained, not in an angry way, just little sighs, little murmurs of dissatisfaction, small, constant shadows. When I gently pointed it out, she paused and said, "Oh my, I didn't even know I was doing that." Most of us don't. But here's what modern neuroscience tells us. When you repeat complaints, the brain strengthens the neural pathways that look for what's wrong. It becomes a habit of perception, a filter. Your attention begins scanning the world for flaws, disappointments, inconveniences. And what you focus on becomes your world. That's why complaints are so dangerous. They feel harmless, but they slowly train the mind to live in scarcity. So what's the antidote? Gratitude. Not the forced artificial kind, but quiet, honest gratitude. The next time you feel a complaint rising, I want you to try something. Pause and thank the opposite. If the traffic is slow, whisper, "I'm grateful I have somewhere to go." If your knees ache, say, "I'm grateful these legs have carried me through life." If someone speaks sharply, try, "I'm grateful I can choose peace instead of matching their tone." This may seem simple, almost too simple, but simplicity is often where the deepest truths live. Gratitude doesn't erase life's difficulties. It doesn't deny pain or pretend everything is perfect. What gratitude does is shift the center of gravity inside you. It moves you from scarcity to sufficiency, from tension to presence, from resistance to acceptance. And slowly, quietly, your world begins to brighten, not because life changed, but because your lens did. Let me ask you this. When was the last time you felt grateful for something ordinary? A breath, a cup of tea, the warmth of sunlight on your hands. Gratitude turns ordinary moments into small miracles. And when you live with even a little gratitude each day, the poison loses its power. There's a truth the Buddha taught more than 2,500 years ago. And the older I get, the more clearly I see it in the lives of the people I meet and in my own life. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. I know that might sound strange at first, so let me explain it the way I've explained it to thousands of people over the years. The Buddha said that every human being will be struck by a first arrow, the arrow of pain. That arrow is life happening as life does a diagnosis, a heartbreak, aging, disappointment, loss. If you're over 50 or 60, you know exactly what this arrow feels like. Life has already introduced you to it. But there is a second arrow, and this one doesn't come from the world. It comes from the mind. The second arrow is the story you tell yourself after the pain. The first arrow says, I lost something. The second arrow says, I'll never recover. The first arrow says, it hurt. The second arrow says, it's my fault. I'm not enough. My life is ruined. That second arrow is where suffering begins. I once worked with a man in his mid-60s. His son had stopped speaking to him after an argument. The silence between them was the first arrow, painful, sharp, real. But the suffering came from the second arrow he kept firing every night I failed as a father. He must hate me. This is the end of our relationship. None of those thoughts were facts. They were interpretations, stories fueled by fear. And those stories kept the wound open long after the moment had passed. Have you ever done that? Have you ever replayed a painful event again and again long after it was over? Long after the world had moved on, but your heart hadn't? Neuroscience tells us something remarkable. When you mentally relive a painful event, the brain reactivates the same neural circuits as if the event were happening now. Your body cannot tell the difference between memory and reality. So each time you replay the hurt, you fire the arrow again. But here's the hope, and it's a powerful hope. You cannot avoid the first arrow, but you can refuse the second. You can learn to meet pain without multiplying it. You can say, yes, this happened. Yes, it hurt. But I will not wound myself over and over. Pain asks for acknowledgement. Suffering asks for permission, and you do not have to grant that permission. When you stop firing the second arrow, something inside you begins to soften. The pain becomes just pain. Not a story, not an identity, not a life sentence. It becomes a visitor, not a prison guard. And slowly, you reclaim your peace. As I've grown older, I've come to realize something that my younger self never understood. The wisest people I've met are also the simplest, not simple-minded, simple-hearted. There's a world of difference. When you're young, you think wisdom is complicated, buried in heavy books, complex philosophies, and big words. But after 60 years of sitting with real human stories, loss, love, regret, healing, I've learned that the deepest truths in life are astonishingly simple. Let me give you an image. Imagine you're holding a jar filled with muddy water. If you keep shaking it, the water never clears. But if you place it down, if you let it be still, slowly the mud settles and the water becomes clear on its own. That's what simplicity does to the mind. It allows the unnecessary to settle, and clarity, true clarity, begins to appear. I once knew a woman in her 70s, a retired teacher. She told me, all my life I complicated things. I worried about every detail, every possibility. Now I realize most of it never mattered. She smiled as she said, these days I focus on 3 things: good food, good company, and a peaceful heart. And I could see it, the freedom on her face. Not because her life was perfect, but because her mind had become simple. Let me ask you something. How many things in your life right now are clutter, not just physical clutter, but emotional and mental clutter? Old grudges, unfinished arguments, expectations that were never yours to carry. The pressure to impress people who have long forgotten your name. We carry so much that is unnecessary, and each burden makes life heavier than it needs to be. Simplicity is not about having less, it's about needing less. It's about recognizing that peace doesn't come from adding more to your life, but from subtracting what no longer serves you. Science even supports this. Studies show that when the brain is overwhelmed with choices, information, and noise, stress hormones rise and clarity drops. But when the environment and the mind are simplified, the body relaxes, the nervous system settles, wisdom becomes more accessible. Because wisdom doesn't shout, it whispers, and simplicity is what allows us to finally hear it. Try this. The next time you're faced with a decision or a moment of stress, ask yourself, what is the simplest truth here? What is unnecessary? What can I gently set down? Most of the time, we already know the answer. We've just buried it under layers of noise. Simplicity brings us back to ourselves, to what is real, what is steady, what is enough. And in that quiet space, the mind becomes wise, not because it knows more, but because it finally knows what matters. There's a truth I didn't fully understand until I was well into my 50s. A truth I wish someone had whispered to me much earlier in life. The people who irritate us the most often reveal the places inside us that still need healing. It's not a comfortable truth, but it is a liberating one. Let me explain it the way I've seen it unfold in hundreds of lives. Whenever someone triggers you, the rude neighbor, the arrogant coworker, the family member who always knows how to push your buttons, it feels like they are the problem. But if you pause, just for a moment, you might notice something else. The reaction rises inside you, not outside. You feel the tightening in your chest, the heat in your face, the rush of anger or defensiveness. Those reactions don't come from the other person. They come from something within you, something old, something tender, something not yet healed. I once worked with a man in his early 60s. He would get furious every time someone interrupted him. Even small interruptions would send him into a quiet storm. One day I asked, "Who interrupted you first?" He looked confused. A few minutes later he whispered, "My father. He never let me finish a sentence." And suddenly, everything made sense. The frustration wasn't about the people interrupting him today. It was about a wound from 50 years ago, still waiting to be acknowledged. Have you ever noticed something similar in yourself? Maybe someone's arrogance irritates you because deep down, you fear your own worth hasn't been fully seen. Maybe someone's dishonesty angers you because you still struggle to forgive yourself for a mistake you made long ago. Maybe someone's coldness hurts you because a part of you still longs for warmth you never received. The Buddha once said, "Your anger is not about them. It's about the suffering inside you asking to be seen." And modern psychology agrees. What we judge harshly in others often mirrors the traits or wounds we've struggled with in ourselves. Now, this doesn't mean you should excuse bad behavior or let people harm you, not at all. It simply means this: every emotional reaction is information, a message from your inner world. The next time someone triggers you, try asking, what is this moment showing me about myself? What old story is being awakened? What part of me still needs healing? When you approach life this way, something beautiful begins to happen. You stop feeling attacked by the world. You stop taking everything so personally. You stop seeing enemies and start seeing mirrors. And with time, the very people who once irritated you become unexpected teachers. They guide you back to the wounded parts of yourself, the parts that are waiting patiently for your compassion. That is the quiet magic of inner work. You don't change others. You change the way you see, and through that, the whole world softens. There's something profoundly human about wanting to be seen, to be appreciated, to be valued. No matter how old we get, 50, 60, even 80, that longing doesn't disappear. We all want to feel like we matter. But here's the hard truth I've witnessed over decades of listening to people's stories. That longing for approval can quietly become the most dangerous prison of all. Let me explain. When we were children, approval felt like survival. A smile meant we were safe. A frown meant trouble. And without realizing it, many of us carried that pattern into adulthood. I once worked with a woman in her early 60s, warm, generous, always helping others. And yet she confessed that she felt exhausted all the time. Not from the work she did, but from the pressure she put on herself to remain likable. She said, "I don't know who I am when I'm not trying to please someone." That broke my heart, because I've seen that same wound in so many people. Let me ask you gently, have you ever shaped your words just to avoid judgment? Have you ever kept silent even when something inside you wanted to speak? Have you ever stayed in a situation long past its time, simply because you didn't want someone to think poorly of you? If you have, you're not alone. Most of us have lived in that invisible prison. The ego whispers, "If they approve of me, then I'm enough. If they love me, then I am lovable. If they praise me, then I have value." But notice the trap. Your worth becomes dependent on someone else's mood, someone else's standards, someone else's opinion of you, opinions that change like the weather. Psychologists today call this the dopamine trap. Every compliment gives you a little hit of pleasure, a small emotional reward. But like any quick fix, it fades quickly, leaving you needing more and more. The Buddha warned about this centuries ago. He said the desire for praise is simply another form of craving, a chain that keeps the mind bound. True freedom comes when you realize something simple but life-changing. You don't need to be approved to be authentic. You don't need applause to be whole. Your worth doesn't rise and fall with someone else's reaction. I often tell my students this, Liv, so that you can respect yourself even in silence. That is a higher form of approval. Imagine waking up one morning and no longer shaping your life to fit someone else's expectations. Imagine choosing your words, your actions, your path, simply because they align with your truth. That, my friend, is liberation. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady like a quiet inner dawn. And once you stop chasing validation, something remarkable happens. You become calmer, clearer, more grounded. And the world's opinions, the ones that used to control you, begin to lose their power. Because the door of the prison was never locked. You only needed to stop waiting for permission to walk out. There's something I've learned, especially in the later chapters of life, that I wish I had understood sooner. Your attention is the most valuable thing you own, not your money, not your time, not even your health. Though all of those matter deeply, attention is even more fundamental, because whatever holds your attention shapes your inner world. Let me show you what I mean. Imagine walking through your home early in the morning. The light is soft, the air is quiet. But if your attention is fixed on yesterday's argument, or tomorrow's worry, or an old regret you haven't released, then even the peace around you feels heavy. Meanwhile, if your attention rests on something simple, the warmth of your coffee, the sound of a bird outside, the softness of your own breath, suddenly life feels spacious again. It's not the world that changed, it's where your attention landed. I once worked with a man in his late 60s who always seemed tense even on calm days. One afternoon he said to me, "I don't know why, but my life feels like a storm that never stops." So I asked him, "Tell me, where does your mind go when it's not occupied?" He paused and said, "To everything that could go wrong." There it was, not a storm outside, a storm inside his attention. Modern neuroscience confirms this. When your attention gravitates toward fear, the brain releases cortisol and adrenaline. But when your attention rests on something grounding, gratitude, breath, light, presence, the brain releases serotonin and oxytocin, the chemistry of peace. In other words, attention is the steering wheel of your emotional life. Let me ask you something gently. Where does your attention go when you're alone? What thoughts do you feed? What stories do you replay? What emotions do you water with your focus? Because whatever you water will grow. If you water resentment, it will grow. If you water fear, it will grow. If you water self-doubt, it will grow. But the same is true for peace, clarity, and joy. Water them even a little and they begin to bloom. One of the most powerful practices I give my students over 50 is beautifully simple. Choose one moment each day to place your attention intentionally. When you wake up, place your attention on one thing you're grateful for. At midday, take 10 seconds to breathe and whisper, "I'm here." At night, recall one moment, even the smallest, that brought you ease. These aren't rituals, they're anchors. And each time you do this, you reclaim a piece of your life from the chaos of distraction. The truth is, the world will always try to steal your attention. Screens, headlines, arguments, noise. But you don't have to give it away so easily. Protect your attention the way you would protect something sacred, because wherever you place it, your life will grow in that direction. There's a truth I didn't fully grasp until later in life, after decades of watching people struggle, heal, fall apart, and rise again. Real wisdom is not cold, it's warm. It is born not from the mind alone, but from the heart. You can read 1,000 books. You can meditate for hours. You can master every philosophy in the world. But if your wisdom has no compassion in it, then it is nothing more than the sharpness of the intellect, clever, but not truly wise. Let me tell you why. When we are young, we think wisdom is about knowing things. We think it's about being right, being logical, being strong. But as we grow older, especially after 50, 60, 70, life softens us. Loss softens us. Mistakes soften us. Love softens us. And through that softening, a deeper wisdom emerges, the kind that sees the world not as a puzzle to solve, but as a living, breathing tapestry of fragile human hearts. I once sat with a man in hospice, a former professor who spent his life studying ancient texts. He told me with tears in his eyes, "All my knowledge means nothing if I cannot use it to be kind." That moment stayed with me, because what he said was true. Intellect without compassion becomes arrogance. Compassion without intellect becomes sentiment, but together they become wisdom. Let me ask you something gently. Have you ever noticed that the wisest people you've met weren't necessarily the smartest? They were the ones who listened deeply, who understood pain without judgment, who offered kindness instead of advice, who held your story with care instead of correction. That's compassion, and compassion is the doorway to true understanding. Neuroscience supports this oddly enough. When we act with compassion, the brain activates regions associated with clarity, empathy, and emotional regulation. In other words, compassion doesn't just make you kinder, it makes you wiser. But compassion isn't just something we give to others, it must begin with ourselves. If you cannot forgive your own mistakes, how can you truly forgive someone else's? If you cannot be gentle with your own pain, how can you be gentle with the world? If you cannot meet your own suffering with tenderness, how will you meet anyone else's? I've learned this the hard way. For many years, I demanded perfection from myself and from everyone around me. It wasn't until life broke me open a few times that I realized something simple but profound. A softened heart sees more clearly than a hardened mind ever will. True wisdom is spacious. It understands. It forgives slowly, but it forgives. It knows that every person you meet is carrying a story you cannot see. And the more compassion you have, the more the world reveals its quiet truths to you. Because in the end, wisdom is not about how much you know, it's about how deeply you care. There's a truth many of us learn late in life, often through heartbreak, disappointment, or simply the quiet erosion of trust over many years. No one owes us anything. Not love, not loyalty, not praise, not gratitude, not even fairness. And yet, even knowing this, we carry expectations like invisible contracts, contracts we believe other people have signed even though they never did. Let me share a story. I once spoke with a woman in her 70s who had spent years feeling hurt because her children didn't visit her as often as she wished. She would say, "After everything I've done, the least they could do is come see me." Her pain was real, her longing was real, but the suffering, the heaviness that sat in her chest day after day came from the expectation beneath her words. They owe me. We all do this in different ways. We give kindness and expect gratitude. We offer love and expect love in return. We sacrifice and expect recognition. We help others and expect loyalty. And when the world doesn't meet those expectations, we feel betrayed not by what happened, but by what we believed should have happened. The Buddha taught that expectation is one of the deepest roots of suffering. Not because wanting things makes us wrong, but because clinging to a specific outcome binds our happiness to forces we cannot control. Let me ask you something. How many times in your life have you been hurt not by someone's actions, but by the meaning you attach to those actions? A friend forgets to call. A spouse doesn't say the words you hoped for. A colleague doesn't acknowledge your effort, and suddenly the mind whispers its old stories. They don't care. I'm not valued, I'm always overlooked. But none of these stories are truth. They are simply the second arrow expectation poisoning the heart. There is another way. When you release the idea that anyone owes you anything, something remarkable happens. A lightness begins to return. You start to see gifts where once you saw obligations. You start to appreciate acts of kindness instead of tallying them. You stop gripping life so tightly. Freedom begins where expectation ends. I often tell my students over 50, if someone loves you, let it be a gift, not a debt they're repaying. If someone thanks you, let it warm your heart, not satisfy your entitlement. If someone disappoints you, remember they are human just like you. This doesn't mean we become passive or allow mistreatment. It simply means we free ourselves from the chains we forged without realizing it. When love is given freely, it feels lighter. When kindness is offered without expectation, it becomes more genuine. And when we stop demanding that life repay us, we become open to receiving its unexpected blessings. Because the truth is simple, the world owes us nothing, but it offers us everything when our hearts are open. There is a kind of wisdom that no book can teach, and no teacher can give. It's the wisdom that only suffering can carve into the soul. When I look back on the hardest seasons of my life, the losses, the heartaches, the disappointments I thought would break me, I realized something I couldn't see at the time. Pain was not the end of me. Pain was the fire that reshaped me. We don't often talk about pain this way. We treat it like an enemy, something to avoid, numb, or outrun. But the older I get, the more I see that some truths can only be learned in the flames. I once worked with a man in his late 60s who had lost his wife after 40 years of marriage. He told me, "For months, I thought the grief would drown me." But then he paused and said something I'll never forget. Grief didn't just break me, it opened me. I feel things now. Kindness, tenderness that I never let myself feel before. That is the strange alchemy of adversity. It strips away what is superficial and leaves only what is real. It burns off the hardness around the heart and makes room for compassion. Have you ever noticed this in yourself? That after a heartbreak, you understood someone else's pain more deeply? That after a failure, you became kinder to those who were struggling? That after a loss, you held people a little closer, a little longer? Pain refines us in ways comfort never can. Neuroscience even shows that adversity changes the brain. When we move through difficulty with awareness, instead of resisting or numbing, the brain rewires toward resilience. We develop deeper emotional capacity, greater patience, sharper clarity. In other words, pain doesn't just hurt, it teaches, it strengthens, it awakens. Imagine a piece of gold placed into a fire. The heat doesn't destroy it, it purifies it. It melts away what doesn't belong, leaving only what is essential. Your suffering works the same way. Every trial you've survived has given you something, even if it's hard to see right now. A softer heart, a stronger spine, a clearer sense of what truly matters. Let me ask you gently, when you look back at the hardest moment of your life, are you the same person you were before it happened? Or did something deepen in you? Compassion, humility, wisdom. I'm not saying pain is good. Pain is pain. Loss is loss. But hidden inside many of these experiences is a quiet invitation. Grow from this. Let this refine you. Let this transform you. When you accept that invitation slowly and perfectly in your own time, you begin to see that adversity isn't just something you survived. It is something that shaped you and the person you are now. The clarity you carry, the tenderness in your heart, the wisdom in your eyes. None of that came from the easy seasons. It came from the fire you walked through, and you walked through it. You're still here, stronger, deeper, more human than before. There is a truth that life teaches all of us sooner or later, sometimes gently, sometimes with a force that knocks the breath out of us. We cannot control life. We can only learn to meet life with a steadier mind. When we're young, we believe the world should bend to our plans. We think if we work hard enough, worry long enough, push strong enough, things will unfold exactly the way we want. But as the decades pass, life humbles us not to break us, but to teach us. I once worked with a man in his mid-70s who told me, all my life I tried to control everything, my job, my family, even my own aging, and now I'm learning. The only thing I ever truly had control over was how I responded. There was a softness, almost a relief in his voice. Because the truth is, control is an illusion we cling to when we feel fear. And the tighter we hold on, the more exhausted we become. Think about the last time something didn't go the way you expected. A loved one changed, a job ended, a plan fell apart, a diagnosis appeared. In those moments we realize sometimes painfully that life doesn't follow our script. But the mind still tries, doesn't it? It tries to predict, to force, to manage, to fix. It tries to control people, outcomes, timelines, even emotions. And that constant grasping becomes suffering. The Stoic philosophers knew this well. Epictetus said, "Some things are within our control and some are not." The Buddha taught the same peace arises not from controlling the world, but from mastering the mind. Let me ask you gently, how many of your worries truly have ever changed an outcome? And how many of them simply drain the joy from your days? There is another way to live. Imagine yourself inside a great dome of white marble, solid, peaceful quiet. Outside, the world is loud. Arguments, judgments, expectations, demands. You hear the echoes, but none of them can penetrate unless you open the door. That dome is your mind when it settles, when you stop trying to control everything outside and begin tending to what is happening inside. Neuroscience confirms this. When you let go of control and return to the breath even for 10 seconds, the nervous system shifts from stress to balance. The mind becomes clearer, the heart becomes softer, and clarity returns. Letting go is not giving up. It is choosing peace over panic. It is choosing presence over prediction. It is remembering that life has its own rhythm and you don't have to force it. You guide your mind. You choose your response. You anchor yourself in compassion. You breathe through the storms. But life itself, it will unfold as it chooses. And the more gently you release your grip, the more life surprises you, not with chaos, but with a quiet, unexpected grace. Because letting go is not losing control. It is learning that peace is found not in holding on, but in knowing what was never yours to hold. There's something sacred about silence. Something most of us don't learn to appreciate until later in life, after the noise of the world has worn us down enough to listen differently. When I was younger, I feared silence. It felt empty, lonely, as if something was missing. But as I grew older, especially after 50, I began to understand what the wise ones knew all along. Silence is not an absence. Silence is a presence. Silence is where the soul returns to itself. Think about the world we live in. Every moment is filled with noise screens, glowing notifications buzzing, conversations layered on top of one another. Even inside our own minds, there is a constant chatter. What if this happens? What did they mean by that? Why did I say this? What should I do next? It's no wonder so many of us feel tired in ways sleep cannot fix. I once worked with a woman in her late 50s who told me she felt spiritually suffocated, not because her life was bad, but because it was loud. She was surrounded by noise all day, and worse noise in her own thoughts. I asked her to try something simple. Sit in silence for 10 minutes each morning. No phone, no TV, no goals, just sit. She returned a week later with tears in her eyes. She said, "I didn't know silence could feel like oxygen." That is the power of silence. Modern neuroscience now confirms what sages understood for centuries. Silence lowers cortisol, slows the racing mind, and activates the brain's capacity to reorganize itself. In silence, the nervous system resets, the heart rate softens, the fog begins to lift. But beyond the science, silence does something even more profound. It clears a path for wisdom to speak. Have you ever noticed that your deepest insights, the moments of clarity that change your life, rarely come when you're rushing? They come when the noise fades. In the shower, on a quiet walk, driving with the radio off, sitting alone as the sun is rising. Wisdom does not shout. It whispers, and silence is what allows you to finally hear it. Let me ask you gently, when was the last time you sat in silence without trying to fix, plan, or solve anything? Not meditation with technique, not prayer with words, just presence, pure, simple presence. Silence is a kind of rebirth. It washes off the dust of the day. It loosens the knots inside the heart. It returns you to yourself. And in that returning, you begin to sense something subtle but powerful, a knowing, a guidance, a voice beneath the noise. Some call it intuition, some call it the soul, some call it the divine within. Whatever name you choose, it lives in the quiet. So give yourself silence not as an escape, but as nourishment. Because in silence, you do not lose yourself. You find the part of you that has been waiting patiently to speak. There's a moment in everyone's life, usually after 50, sometimes much earlier, when we finally begin to understand that fear isn't trying to destroy us, it's trying to teach us. For most of my life, I misunderstood fear. I thought it meant stop. I thought it meant danger. I thought it meant something was wrong with me. But the older I get, the more I see fear for what it truly is. Fear is a threshold, a doorway, a guardian standing at the edge of our deepest growth. Let me share a story. A man in his early 60s once told me he had spent decades avoiding anything that stirred fear in him. New relationships, new challenges, even new hobbies. He said, "I just wanted to stay safe." But at 62, he admitted something quietly: I wasn't safe. I was stuck. Fear hadn't protected him. It had imprisoned him. I asked him to imagine fear differently, not as a wall, but as a lion standing in front of a wooden door. Behind that door is everything he truly wanted: connection, purpose, peace, freedom. And the lion, it wasn't there to attack him. It was there to ask one question: "Are you ready?" When he heard that, he went silent. Then he whispered, "I think I've been running from the wrong thing." You see, fear is rarely about the event itself. Psychologists tell us that the amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for fear, reacts more intensely to imagined threats than real ones. We don't suffer from reality as much as we suffer from what our minds anticipate. Think about your own life. How many fears turned out to be stories, shadows on the wall that disappeared when the lights came on? Fear of being alone, fear of failing, fear of being judged, fear of starting over, fear of the unknown. And yet every time you walked through a fear, every single time you came out wiser, didn't you? Fear is not the enemy, it's the invitation. It says, step forward, grow here. Something inside you is ready to expand. The Buddhists call this turning toward the lion. The Stoics say, what stands in the way becomes the way. Modern neuroscience calls it adaptive resilience. But in simple human language, it means this: your fear is pointing to the very place where your soul is ready to evolve. So the next time fear rises in your chest, in your throat, in the quiet space of your thoughts, don't run immediately. Don't numb it. Don't fight it. Pause. Breathe. Look at it the way a wise elder looks at a child having a moment, with understanding, with patience, with curiosity. Ask, what are you trying to show me? What part of me is ready to grow? What door are you guarding? Because fear will not disappear when you run. It dissolves when you walk through it. And on the other side, you'll often find something you didn't expect. A stronger heart, a clearer mind, a deeper trust in yourself. Fear was never the enemy. It was the guide, quietly pointing toward the next chapter of your becoming. There's a simple truth I've watched unfold again and again in people over 50, 60, 70, and in my own life as well. No emotion lasts forever. Not joy, not anger, not fear, not sorrow. Every emotion, no matter how intense, rises, peaks, and eventually dissolves just like a wave returning to the ocean. But if that's true, you may wonder, why do some emotions stay with me for years? The answer is quiet but powerful. Emotions fade. Stories linger. Let me explain. Imagine a cloud drifting across the sky. If you let it pass, the sky clears on its own. But if you hold onto the cloud, if you name it, define it, wrap it in meaning, suddenly it feels permanent. Our emotions work the same way. I once worked with a woman who said she'd been angry for 20 years. But when we sat down and began to unravel the feeling, we discovered something surprising. She wasn't angry for 20 years. She was angry for 20 moments, but she had replayed the same story thousands of times. The story was what kept the emotion alive. Neuroscience confirms this. An emotion itself lasts only about 90 seconds in the nervous system. After that, what keeps it looping is the narrative we attach to it. He shouldn't have done that. I'm always treated this way. No one ever listens to me. I'm not enough. I'll never heal. These stories act like fuel. Without them, the flame of the emotion naturally dies down. With them, the fire keeps burning long after the original spark is gone. Let me ask you gently, what emotion are you still holding? Not because it's here now, but because the story hasn't been released. Is it sadness from something that ended long ago? Is it anger from a betrayal that can't be undone? Is it guilt from a mistake that no longer defines who you are? Is it fear from a chapter that's already behind you? I've seen countless people discover incredible freedom simply by learning to separate the emotion from the story. Try this. The next time a strong emotion rises, don't say, I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm anxious. Instead, say, this is sadness, this is anger, this is anxiety. And then gently ask yourself, What story am I adding to this feeling? You'll notice something remarkable. When you remove the story, the emotion softens. It becomes lighter, less sticky, like a cloud drifting instead of a storm settling in, because emotions are not the problem. They're natural, they're human, they're temporary. It's the story, the meaning we wrap around them, that turns a passing feeling into a lingering wound. When you allow an emotion to be just what it is, a wave, a cloud, a moment, it moves, it shifts, it releases. And what remains is clarity, presence, and a deeper sense of peace. Because underneath every emotion is the same quiet truth. You were never meant to hold the storm forever. You were meant to let it pass.